Hello, it's Amy. I'm back again reading from the Journal of Emily Shore. We are beginning with the entry for March 17th, 1839. I went to church as usual in the afternoon. And we have a blank here so we don't know the name of the preacher. Mister's two sermons were both intensely high church and Puseyite. The most intolerant notions delivered dogmatically and positively, without any attempt at reasoning and argument. In point of fact, he actually anathematized all who did not strictly conform to every rule and ceremony and tradition of Mother Church. And much of both sermons was distinctly aimed at excellent Mr. Langford, who is in the habit of holding meetings for prayer and religious instruction. A great sensation was created by these sermons, which seemed to have excited universal disapprobation, and everyone whom Papa met burst out in condemnation of them. How melancholy that religious feuds and factions should be introduced even into this remote place. Papa has been rather defending the preacher, to his enemies on the ground that, as he thinks these opinions matters of vital importance, he is perfectly right to insist on them from the pulpit. But it is the intolerant dictatorial spirit which is much to be regretted. March 19th, Tuesday. I did not ride and was all morning pleasantly engaged in my room. Having finished my devotions and reading, I wrote my journal and then worked at the same time learning John. I'm not sure what she means by John. Being then obliged to vacate, I went into the drawing room and read Piccola. On returning, I finished St. John. St. John. She was reading St. John. And learnt over again a chart of chronology. Then I worked till dinner. I had every now and then a few housekeeping interruptions. Dinner over, I worked a little, lay down in my room and read my afternoon portion of Scripture. I then returned to the drawing room, placed myself on the sofa chair, and took up Combes' Phrenology, which amused me not a little. Mackie returned from Canicle in a state of great delight, and was decidedly of opinion that the reputed fossil bed cannot be really the remains of a forest. Papa and Mamma dined at the Temples, and we had a merry tea at home. After tea, I retired to my room, where I am now sitting. March 21st, Thursday. Since I have been in Madeira, I have had a strange shrinking from writing letters, even to those I love best. It has now become an effort of mind and body, which I dread to attempt and would wilfully avoid altogether. Day after day I have been endeavouring to make up my mind to begin preparing letters which I ought to write by the Vernon, but it was not till this day of rain that I have really persuaded myself to do so. I began a letter to Tilla, but it is a painful task, and I find no pleasure in it, as I should once have done. I can hardly account for this feeling, except by the loss of all hope that we shall ever meet again. March 24, Palm Sunday. Enter Dr. Nichol, bringing us a little packet of fresh dates, no doubt from one of the island palms. We thought them excellent. The doctor brought also a Welsh prayer book for the benefit of Louisa, who is mad about learning Welsh, in which Dr. N is well versed. He read and explained a little of it, and I was much interested at the resemblance between some of the primitive words and those of the Greek and Latin. March 25th, Monday. Miss Freeman drank tea with us this evening, which is a very unwanted concession on her part, for she generally refuses all evening invitations on account of her brother, and she only came now after as much pressing as we could without selfishness employ. How happy you are, she remarked to me, to have had leisure and opportunity to cultivate your mind. And how happy I am to have had such a father, I added. He has taken such pains with me. You ought to be happy. You will be happy, she repeated, kissing me. After she had completed the survey of my room and its multifarious contents, she suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, I am so glad that I am not going to stay here, Emily." "Why?" "Because you would soon find out what an ignoramus I am, and you would not love me." And this is the only evening that this Miss Freeman has spent or will ever spend with us. One of the last few times that I shall see her at all. Like a beautiful vision, she has just crossed my path. Oh, for how short a time. March 26, Tuesday. Mrs. Winter good-naturedly called to give A lesson in German, which she has done 2 or 3 times before, and then Dr. N called to give L a lesson in Welsh. I am sure languages are popular amongst us. Oh, and I forgot. To make it complete, I should have added that Senor Branco came in the morning to teach Papa Portuguese. So the languages we study are no less than 8, including one which only Mamma understands: Greek, Latin, French, Italian, German, Portuguese, Welsh, Spanish. Dr. N drank tea with us and was extremely entertaining. Mamma said, "Dr. N, don't you think the Portuguese a very good-humoured race?" "Oh, no, ma'am," he replied, a very decided shake of the head. "Dear, why, they always seem so civil and courteous in their manners. I thought they were good-tempered." "Yes, ma'am, if you are civil to them, they are good-tempered to you. But provoke them and see how their eyes blaze." I think that's rather true of anyone. Provoke someone and see how their eyes will blaze. He went on to tell us how ready they were to knock down anyone with a pole on any provocation, or even to whip out their knives. The Portuguese gentlemen, having each of their private enemies, never venture about at night without a large company and a pole to defend themselves. 2 men were killed on the spot in a quarrel which took place in a wine shop just before we came. And these murderers generally escape justice by going to Lisbon, where there is no one to prosecute. March 27, Wednesday. I was much rejoiced by the arrival of my bookshelves this afternoon. I immediately set to work to arrange my unfortunate books, which have been lying on the floor for these 2 months. Having done this to my satisfaction, I proceeded to root out of my portfolios and papers and maps, and put them too in order. March 28, Thursday. On my way back, I sent away the horse to the Rua João Tavero, and called at and we're missing a name here again, called at someone's, who I believe are somewhat offended at my going there so seldom. Senor George conducted me upstairs, and very gracious, told me how much better I looked, and gathered me some beautiful flowers of the rose apple, a large tree which bears these large blossoms, and a pretty fruit like wax with a poisonous kernel. Mrs., and we are missing the name again, meant to be gracious, but was as cold as usual. I cannot bear these cold exteriors which never melt. They give the idea of nothing but ice within. Senor George insisted on taking me to the cathedral, which is close by, to see the ceremonies there transacting, this being Holy Thursday. I had never been within the cathedral before. It is a handsome building, and seems richly adorned with gilding and carving. But I could not see much of it because it was darkened, in which state it will remain till 12 o'clock on Saturday night. It was filled with kneeling Portuguese, and I heard the voice of a priest chanting in a very harsh, unmusical tone. We stayed there but a minute, and on coming out met with Papa in company with Senor Branco, who was taking him there for the same purpose. Coming in, I found a stuffed hopo, which Mr. Page had left me, having procured it from Colonel Darcy. And I'm not sure what a stuffed hopo is. Hoopoe. So I'll have to look that up after I finish reading here. March 29th, Good Friday. I had set my heart on going to church this morning and receiving the communion, and this by the use of Freeman's horse I was enabled to do. It was proposed to me only to come to the communion for fear of fatigue, but I was anxious to join in the whole service, and felt, besides, unusually strong and well. So I went with the rest, but I had miscalculated my strength, and was so exhausted that I could not enjoy as I had wished and hoped that part of the service to which I had most looked forward. The moonlight nights are quite heavenly. In England we do not know what moonlight is. Here there is a brilliancy in the sky, a balm, a purity of the air which cannot be imagined without being experienced. The splendor with which the silver rays of the broad, bright moon gleam on the still ocean and the white houses of sleeping Funchal has something almost fairy-like. I can see by it to read the smallest print. March 30th, Saturday. We had 7 sets of visitors today, whereof I shall mention 3. One, Mr. Lowe, who gave us the curious information that Madeira is just 3 times as damp a climate as England, but that the damp did not show. How there can be damp which does not show, I cannot tell. I wonder if by damp he means what we call humidity. And I do wonder, is Portugal a humid place? I'm certainly used to humidity here in Ottawa. Second guest, Mrs. Winter, who said of Miss Freeman, "If ever anyone retain their baptismal purity, it is she." And 3, Miss Freeman herself. March 31st. Being Easter Sunday, this was a day of great festivity among the Portuguese. Amongst other ludicrous ceremonies, the fish which they have been eating all Lent, I forget the species, were buried in triumph, a great procession attending. I understand, too, that at this time they are apt to caricature the English, dressing up people to represent the most remarkable. Last year, the eccentric Miss Norton was thus represented, which gave her great offence. I took up the first volume of Barrow's Sermons, which I have never opened before, and began the first sermon. The first sentence appalled us by its wonderful length. It is not, however, obscure. It is an eloquent sermon, but I cannot like the way of treating the subject of the redemption. It is the usual way, and Papa particularly objects. We talk of its being impossible for God to pardon man on any other terms. But what right have we to say this? How do we know what God could or could not do? It is enough for us to know what he has done. And as to the scheme of being analogous to our ideas of justice, it is no justice to punish an innocent man instead of a guilty, nor was it ever thought so. We cannot, and must not expect to understand how Christ's death saves us. It is sufficient to know that it does. One thing is clear, it shows us as strongly as possible God's horror of sin, which required, why we do not know, so great a sacrifice. April 1st, Monday. After my ride, I went to the Freemans. Mrs. Winter called soon after, and was shut up with Miss F. for about half an hour in her room, during which time I had a chat with Mr. F. At about 12, Mamma called by agreement with Miss F., who took up to introduce her to Mrs. Robinson, for we are very anxious to become friends to her after her ministering angel is gone. I had after this a delightful quiet talk with dear Miss F., perhaps the last morning I shall spend with her. We conversed on the pain of looking back on past happiness, and though I have so often observed it before, I was more and more struck by the entire devotedness of Miss F.'s confidence in our Heavenly Father, by her meek and patient submission to his will, even under the heaviest afflictions. The certainty she entertains that all things, whether joy or sorrow, are for our good, so that though she says she dares not look back often to the days before her troubles began, the contrast is so painful, yet she never wishes anything otherwise. This is a state of mind most beautiful. Would that I could attain to something like it. Nothing makes me feel my own defects more painfully than seeing these bright features in the character of another. May 18th. On the 4th of April, I broke a blood vessel and am now dying of consumption, in great suffering, and I may not live many weeks. God be merciful to me, a sinner. God be praised for giving me such excellent parents. They are more than any wishes could desire, or than any words can sufficiently praise. Their presence is like sunshine to my illness. May 22nd. I have suffered much with lying long, and have been just put on our hydrostatic bed. Relief wonderful. My portrait has just been taken. They say excellent. And there is an editor's note here. This portrait was taken by a young artist himself, the victim of the same malady, of which he also died in Madeira, not long after his sitter. The painting was very slight, for she could not bear long the fatigue of sitting, but the sweet, wasted face was a true likeness. The masses of hair, which she had for weeks during her illness persisted in dressing for herself, having been cut off, made her face look like a child's. The eyes were bright but gentle, the geranium color was fixed on her cheeks, and close to her hand, in touching reminder of her lifelong tastes, were a stuffed hoopoe and bee-eater given her by a friend in Madeira. And I'm just going to pause to go to the front of the book here, because here is a portrait of Emily with there a bird just on her lap there. But we have reached the bitter end. I linger on in the same way and do not yet sink. Alas, I can never see Richard again. May 27, Monday. I feel weaker every morning, and I suppose I am beginning to sink. Still, I can at times take up my pen. I have had my long back hair cut off. Dear Papa wears a chain made from it. Mamma will have one too. And here ends the extracts, but the writer added a page more to her journal, the last words being written in a tremulous yet quite legible hand on June 24th, a fortnight before her release. And that is the end of the journal of Emily Shore. So that is her life as described by Emily from her adolescent years to her early adulthood, cut short in the year 1839. And we do have some more content here. We have some of her writings in the back of the book here. The Interruptions, which appears to be a play or a scene from a play, written at the age of 13. We have something called The Lady and the Sage, written at the age of 15 and a half years old. If we look farther here, we have extracts from poems written from 1833 to 1838. There's quite a number of poems here over those years. And that will be it. But I will return with another video or two just to read these extra materials written by Emily, which are in the back of the book. But there we have it. Thank you for being with me. Thank you for joining me for these readings over the last few months. I hope you've enjoyed Emily's journal as much as I have. And it truly, truly brings me sadness to come to the end of it for more reasons than just one.